We're given two functions here, f of x and g of x, and we're asked to add them and multiply them and do a few things like that. But the first thing I want to do is draw your attention to the functions themselves, because as you will hopefully have seen in a previous video, some functions have implied domains, and we need to be really careful that we take that into account when we process them. So if we remember the three functions that have implied domains, there's the square root, there's the 1 over something function, and there's the log function. And they all have implied domains. A square root, remember, underneath the radical must be greater than or equal to 0. When you have a fraction, remember the denominator cannot equal 0. And when you have a log, remember whatever in the brackets must be greater than 0, not even equal to 0. So because of these restrictions on the domains, we need to be very careful when we deal with these functions. So let's have a look at f of x first. Now, f of x has a square root, so we know that x plus 3 must be greater than or equal to 0. Otherwise, we'll have a negative underneath here and horrible things will happen. Therefore, algebra tells us that x must be greater than or less than negative 3. So that's our first restriction on our domain. Second, let's have a look at g of x. Now g of x, because of the square root again, we know 1 minus x must be greater than or equal to 0. Therefore, negative x must be greater than or equal to negative 1. And remember, if we multiply by negative 1, our inequality sign flips. So therefore, x must be less than or equal to 1. So now we know the restriction on our domain. So therefore, we can say the common domain is going to be where x is greater than or equal to negative 3 and where x is less than or equal to 1. So if I combine x greater than or equal to negative 3 and x less than or equal to 1, then that means I'm between, on my number line, negative 3, including it, negative 2, negative 1, 0, and here is 1, and I include that as well. So my common domain is this red area that I've drawn here. Therefore, my domain, the common domain is x, so that x is an element of square bracket, because it includes from negative 3 to 1, and square bracket because they're included. So now I've stated the common domain. Therefore, I know these functions, these combined functions here, only exist over these numbers. So now let's work this out. Our first question, part A, asks for f plus g of x. So now let's add up our two functions. We'll have the square root of x plus 3 plus the square root of 1 minus x. And that's it. The only other thing we need to do is state our domain. So we can say there where x is between negative 3 and 1. And there's our domain stated and our equation. Next, f plus g of 2. Well, now what we can do is substitute 2 into our equation. If we think about this, what happens? We end up with a problem because 2 is outside our domain. So therefore, f plus g of 2 is undefined. And our function, combined function, doesn't exist there. But let's imagine that things change. And this is actually going to be a -2. -2 is within our domain. So if the question asks for f plus g of -2, then what we would do is we'd substitute -2 in to our equation. So it would be -2 plus 3 plus 1 minus -2, which equals √1 plus, that's 1 plus 2, √3 equals 1 plus √3. And that would be our answer for f plus g of -2. Now let's look at the product functions. And you'll notice that I've cunningly put a -2 in here so we don't run into that same problem. So part C, which is fg of x, means we're going to multiply them. So that will be x plus 3 square root times √1 minus x, which if we want to, we could write as root x plus 3, 1 minus x, with everything under the one radical. And remember that x is between, so x such that x is between -3 and 1. And there are our little curly brackets. So there's our answer for part C. And our final part, part D, fg of -2, we can substitute -2 in here. So we'll get the square root of -2 plus 3 times the square root of 1 minus -2 is the square root of 1 times 3 is √3. And there's my answer. And that's how we add and multiply different functions. Make sure that we always remember our restrictions on the domain, even if you can spell it, and you'll be going great guns.
If you found this video helpful, please subscribe or like. Thanks.